Hi guys, this is a response video for requests for help with moving NavMods that keep their shape but don't collide with the player. So let's go ahead and see how we do this. Okay, so we'll start off with just the nav modifier itself, and I just created a yellow area class for it so we could see it a little better. So this is the blueprint for the NavMod, and here it is here in my world outliner. And just real quick, I'm using a simple interp to movement node just to make it move for this demonstration. But the main thing we're going to be looking at is the nav modifier itself. So let's go ahead and open up its blueprint. Now here on the blueprint for the nav modifier, the first thing we'll see is that we don't have any static meshes or anything. We just have the nav modifier itself. And so in a previous video, we talked about how the nav modifier will use the footprint of an object to determine what size it should be. We want to also mention that it's doing this from the collisions of that object, not the object itself. Now the reason why that's important is because here, where we don't have any static mesh, that also means we don't have any collisions for the static mesh. So the nav modifier doesn't know what it's supposed to look like. So in a situation like this, it will come over to this fail-safe extent and it will give itself a generic box shape to start with. And of course you can change that box shape. Let's go ahead and see what that looks like. Okay, now back here in the content browser we can see that the NavMod changed its shape, and if we go ahead and start the game and turn on navigation, then we can see that it keeps its shape and it's moving along and updating the nav mesh like normal. And just a quick note, even though you're not seeing the yellow area class, the tiles are turning red to let us know that they're being updated by the movement, but part of that update includes everything associated with the yellow area class. Okay, so let's exit out of the game and go back to the blueprint for the NavMod. Okay, and back here on the blueprint for the NavMod, let's take a look at the collisions, and we'll see that it really only interacts with the nav mesh, but it doesn't really interact with the characters. So what we want to do is give collisions to the NavMod that'll overlap with the characters, but not block them from going through. So the first thing we'll do is we'll come over to the failsafe extent, and we can put that back to default, because whatever collisions we give it, it's going to override this anyways. Now the two methods we're going to try is to use a static mesh, and then we'll try to use just a regular collision volume. So let's get started with the static mesh version first. Okay, let's start by adding our static mesh component, and I'm just going to give it a basic cube shape for this. And I'll just use this simple material that I use for demonstration, and I'm going to resize it real quick. Okay, now let's go ahead and save that and take a look at it in the content browser real quick. And if we zoom in, we can see that the collisions from the static mesh are updating the nav mesh, but it's competing with the nav modifier. So let's go back to the blueprint and we'll search for navigation, and we'll uncheck this option here, can never affect navigation. Let's compile and save that, and now when we go back to the content browser, we'll see that they're no longer competing with each other. Okay, let's go back and check out the collisions for the static mesh. Okay, and let's just go ahead and search for a collision, and we'll see that the preset is OverlapAllDynamic. So the dynamic actor is the pawn, and the collisions are going to block him, but of course we don't want that. We want the pawn to be able to walk through the object. So let's expand this real quick. Now we can't turn collisions off because they're necessary for the nav modifier to function properly. So the one we'll choose is OverlapAllDynamic, and that'll essentially turn the collisions into a trigger volume. So let's go to the bottom, and we'll see this option here on component begin overlap. And now I'm just going to add a simple print string, but you can add any function you want here. I'm just going to say player taking damage. And let's compile and save that and see it in game. And we'll turn on navigation. And now the player is going to be able to walk through it, but when he does, he'll take the damage. Okay, now let's go back to the blueprint real quick. Okay, just a quick recap. We want the nav modifier to use the collisions from the static mesh, but we don't want any conflict when it comes to the nav mesh. And let's go ahead and take another look at the collisions themselves. remember that we didn't want them to block the player. We wanted them to overlap the player and be sort of like a trigger volume. Okay, now let's go ahead and delete the static mesh, and we'll take a look at that other method. Okay, so in this method, we're just going to add a simple box collision. And like we saw in a previous video, the box collision can also act as a nav modifier itself. So in this case, we can actually just delete the one we have, and we'll select the box collision, and we'll come down here and we'll select dynamic obstacle. We'll check that. We'll assign the area class that we were using earlier. And I'm just going to resize this again real quick. I'm going to make it a little bigger than I did last time. I'm also going to move it up so that it's even with the ground. And let's go ahead and check the collision for it. And we see that by default, it already has the overlap preset. So let's go down to the bottom, and we'll add again the onComponentBegin overlap. Okay, let's compile and save that and check it out in game. Okay, and back here in the game, we'll see that it works just like it did, only this time there's no static mesh that's visible to the player. So again, if the player tries to walk through it, it'll tell him that he's taking the damage, and you see that the AI character had to walk around it. And if you need more help with the area classes and query filters, that's a separate video that I'll put in the description below. But other than that, I hope that answered your question. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in another video.